just double check with them. Good evening. I'm Danielle Sevilla, and I'll be serving as the facilitator for tonight's meeting. We want to welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us tonight for the Regional Decarbonization Framework convening. We're excited to welcome you tonight here in District 5 for this phase of the RDF. I'd like to invite anyone who needs interpretation tonight to please check in with Enrique Gasca. Si hay alguien que necesita traducción en español, por favor vayan con mi colega Enrique para que él les pueda atender. I do want to mention that we are filming tonight, so please be aware that we're filming. If you have any questions or concerns, again, you can visit our colleagues over here at the table. Oh. Can we go to the next slide? So before we get started tonight, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we call home. There are communities in the San Diego region that face unjust conditions and circumstances related to the environments in which they live. The tribal nations of the San Diego region are an example of one community that has historically faced such injustices. We want to acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples, who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 18 tribal nations in our region. That's the most in any county in the country, so I think that's really worthy of acknowledging when we're here in San Diego. From our 4 cultural groups, the Kumayay Diegueño, the Luiseño, the Cupeño, and the Cahuilla. We aspire to learn from indigenous traditional knowledge and experiences in undoing the injustices of the past. So thank you, it's an honor to be here on these lands. So I'd also like to welcome and acknowledge our community partners here tonight who have been instrumental in this project with us. We have Climate Action Campaign and their partner organizations. We want to thank them for their collaboration and support. Tonight we have Karina Contreras with Climate Action Campaign. Karina?
Hi everyone, my name is Corina Contreras and I'm here in my role as Transportation Policy Advocate for Climate Action Campaign. I thank you so much for being here. There is so much that we can do collectively. From traditional ecological knowledge to transportation, we can come together and build the strategies necessary to address the issues that we're facing. You know, we're here in Escondido and it gets really hot here, really hot. We got to look at where our cool zones are and where they're not. How do people get there? How do people go to the grocery store? How do you go to the bank and it not take 2 hours, right? We need to be able to invest in connecting people. We need to be able to invest in our communities that for so long have not had any investment. So I just want to tell you thank you. I hope that you stay engaged throughout this process. This is a really important meeting, And the Board of Supervisors, they want to hear your input. So when it's time for questions and answers, please ask all the questions that you have. We need to hear your voice. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Contreras. That was actually a perfect segue. So I do want to say that this is the fourth in a series of 5 convenings that we're holding. All of the meetings that we're holding are hybrid in nature. That means that in addition to you folks that are here with us live tonight, we do have a Zoom component, and that is where we will also be going back and forth when we get to that Q&A section. In addition to the Zoom component, we have a satellite location tonight at Borrego Springs Library. So when we get to the Q&A, we are very eager to hear from all of you. So we're going to have 3 presentations tonight, followed by the Q&A session with all of our presenters. For our live audience here, if you have a question, we'll ask that you raise your hand, and one of our facilitators will bring you the mic. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, there is a Q&A box where you can put your comments. That Q&A box will be open for you throughout the meeting. You can drop comments and questions in there at any time. Many of you on Zoom are familiar with the chat function. That is not where you'll be putting your comments. It will be specifically in the Q&A box. For those of you that are joining us from Borrego Springs Library, if you can please be sure to include in your comment that you're joining us from that satellite location. There are also comment cards at the front. You can use those comment cards to take notes for yourself for when you're ready to ask a question, or you can drop it in the comment card box that we have at the front. We most likely will not be able to get to all of the questions tonight, so we want to encourage you to use those comment cards. Also, we do have an email address that you can email us at, which is zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov. So please be sure to make a note of your comments and questions if we don't get to them tonight. All of the questions and comments will be captured and reflected on the RDF website. Let's see. So now with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Murtaza Baksamusa with a doctoral degree in planning from the University of Southern California. He is the County of San Diego's program manager for regional sustainability. He works for the county's new Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. Murtaza is a thinker, a writer, and a planner. He's a nationally recognized expert on community benefit agreements and other forms of civic empowerment. As a father of 2 remarkable daughters, Murtaza is passionate about a sustainable future for our planet. I recently heard him say that with the work we're doing, we're saving the planet as well as helping our communities. And to me, in a nutshell, that really embodies the passion and the authenticity that he brings to this work. Murtaza?
Thank you, Danielle, for that introduction. My name is Murtaza Baksamusa. As Danielle mentioned, I'm the program manager for regional sustainability for the County of San Diego. I'm really excited for this flagship project from our new Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice, which is a regional office which has both sustainability and environmental justice as its key focus areas. Today I'll be presenting you the program as well as doing the question and answers from you later on. But in order to kick off the program today, really honored and humbled for this particular event, which is the regional convening for the 5th District, to have Supervisor Jim Desmond here. So it's an honor for us to welcome. Please welcome your supervisor, Jim Desmond.
Well, thank you, Murtaza. Appreciate it. Thanks again for everybody being here tonight. San Diego County Supervisor Jim Desmond, we're representing District 5 here, which is Escondido, San Marcos Vista, Oceanside, all the way out to Borrego. So hello, Borrego Springs, if you're on here tonight. Essentially, well, you know why you're here. Tonight, the county is working on a regional decarbonization framework that was passed unanimously by the Board of Supervisors. And basically, this is a roadmap, and we're here tonight to get your input and your opinions on how we achieve decarbonization here in the region. I think it's by 2050 is what the plan. And for me, we definitely absolutely have to pursue this. We have to get off the carbon fuel. We have to get off of fossil fuels. But we need to do it sensibly and reasonably. We have to have a plan in place. We don't want to derail the economy. We don't want to put people out of work. But we definitely do have to achieve some of these goals, but with a practical means in place. We need clean energy. I don't think that's really up for debate, but I'm not really, we're not there yet. I was just talking with Sonia here earlier tonight, or she was talking to me. But do we really want to put solar panels all the way out, all the way in the desert, and just have nothing but solar panels out there? No, we can't do that. But do we want power lines coming across from there? The problem I think we have in San Diego County is that a lot of the renewable energy is in the unincorporated area, in the desert areas, and on the mountains with the wind, and yet everybody else lives near the coast. So it's tough trying to get the connection there made as well. I see, Dr. Wooten, you're here. I just noticed you. Good to see you. And we also know, switching to electric cars, which I think is where the future is, to electric and autonomous vehicles. But we need the infrastructure, in place to be able to do that and provide all of that energy for not only cars, but in the future, all the appliances, your hot water heater, your stove, your furnace, all those types of things going into electric. Or hopefully someday, I'm hoping the fusion catches on real quick as an energy source. But what we saw last summer, even, we can't all charge our cars when everybody's trying to run their electricity. So we have to have practical solutions moving forward, particularly for our farmers and our agricultural areas. District 5 that I represent, we have Valley Center, Fallbrook, a lot of the unincorporated areas, a lot of nurseries, a lot of farming. And one of the things I think the farmers are taking a kind of a short rift on is the fact that with all they grow, they should get credit for sequestering some of that CO2. Because they've been doing that for years, and getting credit for that type of activity and for and continue farming and having a viable business. I think that's one of the aspects. If I were sitting out there tonight, is raise that hey, well, let's make sure that farming and all the agriculture gets the credit they do. So tonight, like I said, the Board of Supervisors, we all voted on this. We'd love to see the decarbonization of the county sooner rather than later. I know there's a lot of ideas out there. I have my ideas, but we really want to hear from you tonight, and we want to hear what your input is, so that once it's all gathered and brought back before us, we'll be able to make good decisions moving forward and getting the decarbonization of San Diego County done sooner rather than later. So thank you for being here. We look forward to your input tonight. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Supervisor. So before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to reiterate for anybody who may have arrived late that we do have translation both here in person as well as on Zoom in Spanish and Arabic. Si necesitan traducción, pueden ir con mi colega Enrique para que les pueda ayudar. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom who would like translation in either of those languages, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click the globe to select the language that you need. Also, I'll remind everyone joining us on Zoom that if you have questions and comments, you can use the Q&A box rather than the chat box and drop those in at any time during the meeting, and we will get to those questions when we go to our Q&A later tonight. Thank you.
So thank you, Supervisor Desmond, for that introduction. Once again, my name is Mortaza, introducing the program, recognizing community needs such as from wildfires, heat waves, droughts, air pollution. These kind of climate events are increasingly becoming more frequent, and their impacts on our communities are becoming more harmful, especially on vulnerable populations. The purpose of this meeting is to engage the community in these discussions. What are the impacts of these events on us as individuals, families, businesses, and how do we address them? Today we are providing you the tools you need to take action on the scale that you choose. Our goal is to hear from you, and we will be providing you a variety of ways to participate in this program. The good news is that we are at a moment of time when there is an unprecedented level of public and private investment. The opportunity for improving our quality of life, as well as creating green jobs for our residents, is here. The program today covers both these sides aspects in terms of climate impacts on our communities, in terms of thinking about how do we address that and adapt as communities, as well as climate mitigation. We'll begin with the county's public health officer giving an overview of public health impacts of climate change, followed by San Diego State University's public health department with an expert on epidemiology, and then followed by that will be the county's land use and environment group that will provide an overview of what the county has been studying in terms of the pathways to decarbonization and the new tools we're developing to help us address these impacts of climate change. And finally, the panel will be up here to answer your questions on these efforts. With that, I'll introduce Dr. Wooten. So Dr. Wilma Wooten is the county's public health officer. She has been with the county for over 2 decades and developed a health equity framework in 2010 for local health departments to integrate equity into their organizations. She received her professional degrees as a medical doctor and a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, following which she completed residency training at the Georgetown Providence Hospital Family Practice Residency Program in Washington, D.C. She currently serves as the chair of the board of directors for the National Public Health Accreditation Board. She is a past board member of the advisory committee to the CDC. In 2020, Dr. Wooten was named by the San Diego Union Tribune as the 2020 San Diegan of the Year. Please welcome Dr. Wilma Wooten.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here and allowing me to share information about the health impacts of climate change, and particularly those conditions that, as our local health department, we have significant traction in making changes in those areas. So in the next slide, I'd like to just point out on the right side of this slide that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, is the leading authority on climate change, and they annually publish numerous reports. So I'd like for you to be aware of 2 reports published last year. The first was in February, focused on the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerabilities of climate change. And then in April of 2022, the mitigation of climate change. So this evening, I am going to talk about these 2 components. But I also want to point out that the IPCC, in their latest reports, have rung the alarm that the latest health check of the Earth's climate has some grim news, and it's that the human activities have been driving up the planet's temperature, and that's evidenced by the graphic that's on the right side there. So as a result of this climate change impact, I'm going to share with you or focus on 2 topics tonight. There's a lot about climate change that I could share, but we're just going to focus on these 2 topics. And what is the problem from a public health perspective, and who is at risk? And then the second focus will be the impacts of extreme weather and climate change, particularly here in San Diego. And these are areas that our local health department works on in collaboration with other county departments. So going to the next slide. So these are 2 leaders, world leaders. On the left, if you click the slide again, you will see this is the Director General for the World Health Organization. And then on the right is Georges Benjamin, who is the Executive Director for the American Public Health Association. And both of these national organizations identify climate change as a public health crisis. In addition to those organizations, in 2019, there was a call to action on climate, health, and equity. There was a policy action agenda that was created, and over 100 organizations came together, and they called on the government, business, and civil society leaders, elected officials, and candidates for office to recognize climate change as a health emergency and to work across government agencies with communities and businesses to promote actions that will address climate, health, and equity policies. So another national organization, and then bringing it closer to home at the state, the California Department of Public Health. The state in 2016 issued several action plans, if you will, across various sectors, including transportation and public health. This quote is from the public health sector plan. It states that the most immediate and concerning impacts for vulnerable populations continue to be extreme heat and air quality, and these are caused by wildfires, as well as intermittent years of extreme precipitation due to El Nino years, as well as extreme prolonged drought. The combination of climate hazards of these natures can occur simultaneously, synergistically, cumulatively, or in sequence. A perfect example, which we are all aware of, is you have rain, and well, you have fires first, then you have rain, and then you have mudslides that causes damage to property. So in the next slide, we're going to ask the question, who is at risk for the impacts of climate change? And if you can just continuously push so we can see the pictures. And I would ask you in the room, who's at risk? But the answer is everyone is at risk for the impacts of climate change, from the very young to the very old, no matter what race or ethnicity, what country you come from, whether you're pregnant or if you are a child or a young adult or an elderly, everyone is impacted by climate change. So in this next slide, what I'd like to show you is the vulnerability assessment. In San Diego, we've participated in what's called CalBrace. It is a CDC model for addressing climate change, and the state of California Department of Public Health adapted that model and created one for California. It's called CalBrace. I encourage you to look that up. One of the first steps, there are 5 steps, but the first step is first defining what is the vulnerability or risk for a particular area. So CDPH actually conducted risk assessments for each of the 58 counties in the state of California. And this is San Diego's specific risk assessment. The risk assessment is stratified across 3 domains: environmental exposure domain, population sensitivity, whether you're old, whether you have air condition, and then adaptive capacity domain, which is related to issues like whether you have trees in your neighborhood or if you have a lot of in what's called impervious spaces, concrete or asphalt. So these were the 3 domains assessed for San Diego, and the most important impact was in the first, environmental exposures, and in the 3rd, adaptive capacity domains. So this was in 2016. The state actually does this on an annual or on a routine basis. The most recent was conducted again in 2022. So fast forward from 2016 to 2022, and this is our current risk assessment. That red line is equivalent to, it indicates the state average. So any metrics that are above the state average should be areas of concern for a given jurisdiction. And then you can see here that the percentage of individuals in very high wildfire risk areas is at the top of the list. The second is impervious spaces. The second is the percentage of households without air conditioner. So those are the top three that were identified for San Diego. Again, you can go on this website, the Climate Change and Health Vulnerability Indicator website. Put in, if you live in Alameda County, you can put in your county, and it will bring up these 21 metrics for any given county. So I encourage you to go to that website. Now, let's move to the second focus that we want to take tonight. And was that means that I'm out of time? Oh, okay. The impacts of extreme measure in climate change. There are three conditions identified on this slide that our local public health department, in collaboration with other county departments, these are areas where we can have an impact. But there are also areas that were identified as problems specifically for San Diego County. So the first is extreme heat. The second is wildfire and wildfire smoke, which is air quality. And then the third would be changes in our vector ecology. So those are the three areas that I will provide more information to you tonight. Moving to excessive heat. So during July 2006, we had an extreme or an excessive heat wave, and it was unprecedented, not only in California, but across the nation. Anywhere from 450 to 6,000 individuals died in just a few days, and 147 died specifically from hyperthermia, and the other deaths were due to exacerbations of chronic conditions. And over 16,000 individuals were hospitalized. Now, in this slide, one thing that our county has is an excessive heat task force. And this table shows the number of alerts that were issued from the National Weather Service. And you can see that in 2020, we had the highest number of alerts that were issued, 20. If we go to this next slide, on the right, these are conditions or the impacts of extreme heat. The impacts can be as mild as heat cramps, or as next area or most serious concern would be heat exhaustion. And the most serious concern due to excessive heat is a heat stroke, which would require someone to be admitted to the hospital. I don't have time to go into the details, but when we post this presentation on the website, you'll have this information. On the left, it basically shows the annual number of reported by the CDC, the number of heat-related deaths that occur each year, which are over 700. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you. Now, this is a study that showed extreme heat and hospitalizations, the impact across the various states. And you can see in the hospitalizations type that are listed at the top of each of these graphs, California had the highest burden of all of these types of hospitalizations, from all-cause hospitalizations due to extreme heat to renal failure. The only hospitalization type that was where California was not first was in the third from the top, and that's all respiratory-related hospitalizations, but we were second in that type of hospitalization. So wildfires and air quality, actually Dr. Oren is going to talk in detail about particulate matter in his presentation, but I just want to drive home the fact that we had very severe wildfires in 2003 and 2007, and at that time, wildfire season was in October. Fast forward to now, experts say that wildfire season is all year round, and that's due to the increased excessive heat incidents that we see. If you look at, this is from the state This is comparing acres burned in California between 1950 and 1921. The year that I want you to pay attention to is at the far right. 2020 had the largest number of acres, over 4 million, the largest number of acres burned, and then that was followed in 2021. So that was approximately 2.5 million acres. Particulate matter is fine microns. It's 2.5 or less microns that can cause adverse health effects. It can cause irritation of the eye, lungs, throat. It can cause asthma attacks or breathing problems. And again, Dr. Oren is going to get into the details of particulate matter in his presentation. So in respect of time, I'll move on. Now, I want you to also know that our Live Well indicators, Live Well San Diego indicators, the number 7 indicator under the area of influence of community is air quality. The Air Pollution Control District actually publishes a daily report of the air quality in San Diego. In 2018, and let me just back up. Air quality is measured as the ratio of days that air quality is rated unhealthy. And the air pollution affects more people than any other pollutant. Lower levels of air pollution in a region correlate with better respiratory and cardiovascular health of the population. So in 2018, under the community area of influence, we had 9.6% of days that were rated, where the air quality was rated as unhealthy for sensitive populations, reflecting more recent data available in 2021. That increased from 9.6, or about 3 days a month. It went down to 4.6% of the days in 2021, which is about 16 days a year, or approximately 1 day per month. So we have seen some improvement here, but there are still other things that we can do to improve. So the last area that I'm going to focus on is in terms of health impacts that our local health department works on with other county health departments, is vector-borne disease. So mosquitoes, I'm going to focus on mosquitoes. They are the culprit here for many of the diseases that we see. In 2003, West Nile virus spread from the East Coast to the West Coast. And then in 2014, we started to see what are called invasive mosquitoes. The species is called Aedes. In particular, Aedes aegypti, Aedes nodoscriptus, and Aedes albopictus. Now, if we go to the next slide, that shows the 3 Aedes and when they came into San Diego. And this is my very last slide. This is published by the Department of Environmental Health and Quality, and it shows Aedes aegypti as well as Aedes nodoscriptus. The Aedes albopictus, while it was in San Diego, it has not been detected in recent determinations. And this particular slide shows detection of the remaining 2 Aedes mosquitoes from January 1st through September 7th of last year. So that's my time, and I appreciate your attention tonight. And I just again encourage you to find out as much as possible about the health effects of climate change, and we're happy to provide additional information or ask any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wooten. So our next speaker is Dr. Oren. He is the director of the School of Public Health at San Diego State University, as well as professor of epidemiology and a core investigator at the Institute for Behavioral and Community Health at SDSU. He's trained as an he's trained as an infectious disease, respiratory, and social epidemiologist with particular expertise in respiratory health and numerous projects in COVID-19, TB, flu, tobacco exposure, and asthma. He has extensive experience working on the effective adoption of interventions in the community, as well as in developing evidence-based strategies and practices from secondary data analysis and novel data sources. He has long-term experience in working with diverse groups on specific targeted testing strategies and disease screenings. He holds an undergraduate degree in neurobiology and behavior from Cornell University, and a PhD and MS degrees in epidemiology from the University of Washington. Dr. Oren.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you all for taking time from your lives to come to this convening. My hope is to complement Dr. Wooten's outstanding presentation, to tell you a little bit more about, quite specifically, wildfires and health. And then from there, not to scare everybody too much, but then to turn you over to all of the possibilities and solutions that we'll hear about after this. So on this slide, this is actually an image of smoke from the 2016 sand fire that blew into the San Fernando Valley suburbs in Los Angeles. And I put this image up just because, it's obviously a dramatic image, but because we're really going to focus, at least in the first part of this talk, and thinking about not just the fire, as obviously, you want to run away from a fire, but really the effects of smoke and that smoke inhalation on health. And then for the second part of my talk, I'm just about 10 minutes, it's not too long, but I'm going to focus a little bit on the differential impacts of wildfires on different groups. Okay. So just briefly, and you'll be hearing more about this tonight, but when we talk about climate change, we're really thinking about the fact that over the last 170 years where we've measured this, we've seen average surface air temperatures continue to go up and up. And over the last century, we're seeing an increase of about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. The reasons for this are numerous, but one of the main causes is that greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, trap heat. And carbon dioxide is produced when oil or gas is burned. So much of the temperature increase that we see is human-driven. Carbon dioxide levels are higher than they've been most in terms of our ability to measure in the last 3 million years. And from what we've seen, because of these changes, climate change will continue to have dramatic effects on human health. So you saw a similar kind of wheel from Dr. Wooten. This is one that comes from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. And I won't go through all the parts of the wheel, but rather let you know that the focus today in thinking about wildfires is really at the convergence of a number of these different factors. Thinking about rising temperatures, more extreme weather events, so higher frequency and intensity of these events. And this image is actually one that may be more familiar to some. This comes from the San Diego Union-Tribune. This is a fire in Harbison Canyon, east part of the county. And it's really here just to illustrate the fact that we continue to see these record-breaking wildfires in California. And in fact, in the past 15 years or so, these wildfires have released twice the amount of emissions that California has been able to cut. So again, beyond just the immediate human health hazard, we're talking about this longer-term issue that we have in terms of, what do we do about this? So as I noted before, climate change increases the frequency, duration, and severity of different events, and particularly of drought. As the past several fire seasons in California make clear, hot drought sets up wildfire risk like nothing else. And an unusually wet season, as we're having now, doesn't always help, since it actually encourages excessive grasses and other plants to grow, which then become highly flammable fire fuel when they dry out. In terms of the link with wildfires, Climate change alters where snow and rain fall, how long snow persists, as well as how that snow or rainfall soaks into the soil. Plants dry out rapidly under hotter temperatures if rain and soil moisture aren't able to compensate. And climate change also alters the zones in which plants can live successfully, again, altering the ecosystem and in turn contributing to the wildfire risk we're seeing. So I just want to show you with this graphic what our primary concern when we think about wildfires. That big gray thing is a human hair that's about 50 to 70 micrometers or microns in size. The principal pollutant of concern from wildfire smoke for both relatively short-term exposures, so if you're talking about hours or even weeks, are the particles that are emitted that tend to be very small, that are the PM 2.5s that you see in this diagram. And the PM just stands for particulate matter. The 2.5 here refers to particles of 2.5 micrometers or less. The reason that these are of great concern is that they're easily inhaled into the deepest recesses of our lung as soon as we inhale some of that smoke. And estimates across the US show that wildfires have accounted for up to 25% of these PM 2.5s that are released. And in recent years across the West and in California, it's more likely to be about half of that PM 2.5 inhalation that we see. So the actual particles and chemical constituents within smoke vary quite a bit depending on the fuel burned, the moisture content, the weather conditions. But in general, this ultrafine particulate matter is the primary public health related hazard that's associated with these exposures. The particulate matter that's found in wildfire smoke is a respiratory irritant, and it both exacerbates pre-existing conditions such as asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, but it's also associated with an increase in broader admissions to the emergency department, respiratory-related hospitalizations. And in this figure, this is from about 10 years ago before, this just shows you the correlation between areas with higher mean PM 2.5s, those small particles, so that's the areas in yellow or red, and higher rates of respiratory admissions. We also see exacerbations of other outcomes that are not favorable. So both in pregnancy, increased preterm deliveries, low birth weights, stillbirths, effects on diabetes, and possibly developmental effects that persist through a lifetime. So I want to shift a little bit to talk, and also Dr. Wooten spoke to this as well more broadly. This figure shows you a very specific wildfire vulnerability framework. And what it shows you is both the potential of wildfire, and that's on the way I'm looking, it's the right side of the wheel, which shows you both the likelihood of a wildfire and the wildfire intensity, as well as what we might call the adaptive capacity of a given area where people live. And under that adaptive capacity fall many, many different factors. And they include individuals' resources, right? Their income, their ability to put a purified, get purified air in their home, the type of housing material they have, their transportation and ability to escape. So there are a whole number of factors listed there. But the bottom line is that evidence indicates that this risk, again, is differential and disproportionately impacts and harms poor communities. And I won't read out this every part of the slide and all the numbers, so you can take a look at this as I speak. But again, we see that these impacts are not uniform through our county or through different parts of our population. We see that risk is generally higher during childhood. It's lower in young adulthood, and then it increases again in middle through old age as the likelihood of heart, lung disease, hypertension, and diabetes increase. That means that when we think about certain life stages, as well as populations, people with pre-existing respiratory or cardiovascular conditions, we need to be particularly diligent about limiting that exposure to wildfire smoke. We also see that more disadvantaged communities tend to live in older housing or more crowded housing. Sometimes the messaging we get when there's a wildfire is to stay indoors, but if you're living in a home that's pretty leaky, you're probably getting minimal protection from staying indoors and from that smoke. So again, if you live in an older home, you're likely to be less protected. And finally, I just want to make a note to this point that if we think about recent times with our COVID pandemic and many wildfires across California, if you're in a lower income or a minority population group, there's a higher chance that you have been working in an essential job. So with dual issues of COVID and wildfire smoke, you're still going to work. And again, if you think of it from the wildfire perspective, that means beyond your risk of contracting a disease, your smoke exposure is probably going to be higher than someone working from home, behind their laptop. So I want to show you a couple slides with actually show a couple graphs illustrating some of these points. Looks like rather quickly. So one here, I just want to show you there's something called a social vulnerability score or index that takes together many of these social factors related to transportation, housing, income. And basically this just shows you that this is actually in California. When there's more burned area, it's also very much related to being in a group with a higher vulnerability score. This looks kind of complicated, but the bottom line is this is data that comes from a wildfire complex in Northern California. And essentially, we just see that the risks, those bars show you different risks for different groups. And the risks are more pronounced in women compared to men, and in adults compared to children, and then again in adults 65 or older. And so again, if it's a higher bar, it's basically a higher what we call relative risk compared to those other groups. Similarly, on the other set of bar graphs, we see that the highest effects are observed in zip codes where there's the lowest median income. Then this slide just shows you the same kind of idea graphically across the US, where you see areas on the top graph with higher what we call kind of wildfire vulnerability potential, more likely to burn. And the bottom, you see actually vulnerability based on these indices in given census tracts. And a little bit hard to see, but again, you can see areas with more yellow or orange in the top map of the US are also more likely to be yellow or orange in the bottom. One more of these. This is mapping that just shows you the same kind of idea by race or ethnicity. Basically, if those lines are going up, then as the wildfire vulnerability score goes up, so does the proportion of individuals with a given background in a given area. And what we see is that in areas where there are great proportions of individuals who are Black, Hispanic, or Native American, there's also higher wildfire vulnerability. And that is not true in areas with a higher proportion of individuals, this is based on census, who are white or Asian Pacific Islander. Finally, and we'll hear more about kind of, again, what we call mitigation and adaptation, but there are various ways of modeling the effects of changing these levels of PM 2.5s that I started with. And this kind of complicated set of graphs is really meant to say, look, if we decrease PM 2.5s through wildfire management, then we can also save a lot of lives. And that's what all of those different bars, the turquoise, orange, and purple bars to the left show. And conversely, towards the bottom there, what we see is when climate change scenarios are exacerbated, more PM 2.5 is released, those bars are pointed to the right, we see excess lives that are lost. So, I thought I had one more slide, but it looks like it maybe, oh, there it is. But I just want to wrap up. This was from a Time magazine cover more than 10 years ago. You may remember it. And, I don't know. Some things have changed and some things have not, right? I think this is still very true. We should be concerned. I'm just glad that we have individuals in the room and in this county who are really thinking about these things and coming up with some action plans. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Orn. So our next speaker, which will be our final presentation for the night before we move into Q&A, is Elise Ruiz. Elise is a group program manager with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice with the County of San Diego. She's a graduate of Arizona State University's College of Global Futures with an executive master's degree in sustainability leadership with a focus on social ecological system science. With a background in environmental biology and policy, Elise previously worked in various natural resource management and environmental compliance roles throughout the greater San Diego area as an environmental biologist. A naturalist at heart, Elise is passionate about her work with the county, creating sustainable solutions for the local community and environment. Elise?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Elise Ruiz, and I'm with the Land Use Environment Group of the county. I'm also a part of the newly established Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. So I'll go ahead and get started here. So today we just heard about the effects of climate change based on public health, such as through extreme heat and toxic air pollution. Climate change refers to the fact that long-term weather conditions, like temperatures and rainfall, are different than what it was in the past. These changes are caused by human activities that have released carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere, causing it to trap more heat. This is why carbon dioxide and other gases are called greenhouse gases, because they heat the planet like a greenhouse heats up. So what can we do to address these gases being emitted from our region? How do we get them to zero? And what are we doing to protect ourselves from climate in the near and long term? These questions touch every part of our lives, from our homes, our work, what we eat, where we live, and how we travel. These questions have driven the cause to develop this effort for over the past 2 years, leading up to this comprehensive review, which we'll go over in this presentation. As we see in this presentation, the answers to these questions cannot be provided by any government or business or individual acting alone. These answers can be strengthened by the engagement and feedback from you as a community. So taking a look at some of the news clips we see here, and I'm sure many of you experienced throughout the different seasons we have here in San Diego, you can notice that a lot of the communities experience heat and weather changes that are quite extreme. So this can mean that our region is likely to experience longer and hotter summers, lesser rain, higher intensity of wildfires, more frequent droughts, and changes to flood production. These newspaper headlines, as you show, are a really good explanation of that, and also what you experience a lot in this area, which are impacts to agriculture, impacts to water scarcity, as we're experiencing with drought. So to address climate change in the San Diego region, we first need to reduce our emissions. This graph shows the biggest emission sources from our region. Transportation, electricity generation, and natural gas use in buildings contribute to about 80% of total regional emissions. So getting these to as close to zero as possible would create significant reductions. In order to address these challenges, our board directed us to work with the best minds in the nation to objectively gauge where we are and where we want to be. So the first principle in getting to zero emissions is to get the data based on the latest science. Second, the heart of this approach is you, the community, and engaging with you. It guides everything what we do at our office. This framework is informed by input from the general public and lived experience from communities who have been disproportionately impacted by pollution, as well as businesses, labor unions, environmental advocates, tribes, and communities across the region. And finally, the speed and scale of addressing the climate crisis will require us to be a part of the solution, working together collaboratively. This is why we need all major players in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors at the table. As our region prepares for decarbonization, the federal and state governments are also making a lot of direction towards this effort. The federal government is providing historic funding to help communities and governments to reduce their emissions in infrastructure and climate projects. Second, California has set ambitious goals to reduce statewide emissions. Here are some of the policy goals set by the state that will impact our region. This means we will remove more emissions than we put into the atmosphere. So this framework began with a technical report by a team of experts led by the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy. This report identified pathways to reduce carbon dioxide emissions in the highest sources of emissions. We also partnered with the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center to assess the region's current efforts through climate action plans and identify what is missing to each region to reach our goal of zero emissions by 2045 or sooner. The framework also includes a workforce development study, which was led by Inclusive Economics, and studied the impact that any future changes in regional climate investments may have on the workforce and opportunities for growth. And the final piece is this framework is the implementation playbook, which we'll go over in a little bit. So first, to take a quick look, we're going to start with the technical report. Here are a few takeaways from the main technical report aspects. First, the region will need to produce clean electricity from renewable energy sources like wind and solar power. The study found that there is enough space to build solar and wind power throughout the region, including large solar and wind plants, rooftop solar, and community solar. We also considered offshore wind and ocean wave energy during this assessment. These points shown here are ideas, not plans or suggested energy policy, but just to show our ability to meet our goal of reaching zero. We provided different scenarios based on existing technology, regulatory environment, and alignment to the state with an equity lens. Next is transportation. So such as a passenger car or truck, buses, and semi-trucks, they create the most emissions in our regions. There are two important solutions. First, the region needs to reduce the number of miles that each person drives through increasing access to efficient public transit and increasing carpooling, making communities safer for biking or walking, or reduce travel distances. Second, the region needs to electrify vehicles, including private vehicles like cars, trucks, trains, and public vehicles like buses. Excuse me. Most of the emissions from buildings, residential buildings and commercial in our region come from fossil fuel-based heating systems like space heaters or water heaters. The most important solutions are to replace these systems with electric systems when the gas systems break in existing buildings, and not to install gas heaters in new buildings. It will also be important for policies to make sure that everyone can switch as soon as possible so no one is left behind paying for gas as others electrify. The next we have is natural climate solutions. Natural lands, which include forests, shrublands, wetlands, grasslands, and deserts, and agricultural lands, naturally capture and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So by protecting and restoring these lands, the land in this region can provide a solution to climate change. And this protects and restores these lands and also provides clean air and water, as well as habitat for wildlife, and provides food and recreation for our communities. Most cities have plans to address climate change with climate action plans, or CAPs. This framework presents the most comprehensive overview of these climate action plans. This chart shows our regional emissions, where we are now and where we're headed in the future through mid-century. The black line you see shows our current and future emissions decreasing by almost a third due to state and federal actions. But this also means there's a lot more work to be done at a local level. The solid green line shows the emissions that would result if all communities and all of the local CAPs are implemented. And the dotted green line shows the decrease in emissions if we were to implement the best CAP commitments from all these plans in the region. You can see here that we still fall short. Our goal is to bring down our regional emissions to zero, referenced by the orange arrow. Next, we're going to take a look at the workforce development study. Investments in addressing climate change will create jobs in the energy sector and related sectors throughout the region. The technical report found that these investments will increase approximately 27,000 jobs per year through 2030, resulting in a net increase in jobs during those years. The new jobs will increase everything from freight movers and bus drivers to a variety of construction trades. After 2030, the results can change, and there may not be a net increase in jobs depending on policy choices. Additionally, the quality of these projected 27,000 jobs is uncertain. Currently, some fossil fuel jobs offer healthcare coverage, union membership, and provide opportunities for workers with a high school education or less. So future policy choices and climate investments can ensure the same or better benefits for green jobs. A complementary report analyzed how San Diego region climate investments can support high road jobs. This work was also done by Inclusive Economics. So how do we define high road jobs? They are jobs that ensure both job quality and job access. And the job quality characteristics can include some of these that you see listed here, such as family supporting wages and benefits, and also job access characteristics includes access and entry level points for local workers and training to support career advancement. As new jobs are created from climate investments, the public and private sector employees, along with workforce development providers and educational institutions, need to ensure that these characteristics and the San Diegans of all demographic groups have access and advancement opportunities in these high-road green job pathways. Finally, we're going to take a look at the implementation playbook. So this is a really great visual of how we're trying to create the implementation playbook as a user-friendly resource, and it can provide long-term strategies to get us to our common goals, which are to get to zero. The implementation playbook provides best practices from local climate plans and a menu of options to address the different sources of emissions. We would be providing a plug-and-play strategy in accessible format, both print and online. Right now, we're looking at the 4 different scales of how we look at the implementation playbook. First, there are numerous actions that individuals throughout the region can take to reduce emissions, and you can contribute to this effort. We're still developing individual actions, as they're not typically included in all caps, so they're not included in the draft of this playbook or today's presentations. But we are breaking ground here. And the second, to go beyond climate action plans, we focus more on government buildings and vehicles on an organizational scale. We wanted to ensure all businesses and other organizations are included. Then we explore community-wide actions for local and tribal governments. Finally, emissions know no boundaries when we identify actions from regional perspectives where we can gain efficiencies and greater outcomes for more collective impact. Next, we're looking at the 5 pathways that are included in this system. And whether within each scale that you're looking at from a perspective of an individual, organization, or community as a region, there's going to be these 5 components and pathways included. So the playbook looks at the sectors that produce the most emissions, which would be transportation, electricity generation, and natural gas use in buildings. It also looks at how land use can naturally remove carbon dioxide emissions from the atmosphere and store them in plants and soils. Lastly, with public input, we have added an additional pathway, food systems and the circular economy, which covers all aspects of food from production to consumption and disposal, and how circular economy aspects focus on reducing life cycle impacts of materials, including climate impacts. Here's a little closer look of those 5 pathways. To go over them, we'll start with buildings. So from a community scale, we can look at ways to make existing buildings more energy efficient and homes resilient to hotter summers and cooler winters, for example, by adding more efficient windows with better insulation. For electricity on an organizational scale, an option would be to develop a policy to require all new facilities and sites to include on-site renewable energy. For food systems and circular economy, organizations can develop and implement policies or programs to encourage bulk purchase of locally grown food that supports local farming communities, as well as reduce the transportation needed to bring food from the outside region. For land use and natural climate solutions, as a region, when we look at this component and develop a regional urban forest strategy that could include an equity analysis to take into consideration and the health factors of vulnerable populations that experience poor air quality and concentration of heat in some neighborhoods. And finally, for transportation, our last example, we as a region can advocate for common software platforms to streamline EV charging. That way anyone can use the platform to find an EV charging station nearest to their location. We need to make sure that no one is left behind when addressing climate change. This is especially important since certain communities have been historically disadvantaged in getting the benefits of public and private investments, whilst they have endured the human and health costs of a polluted environment. There are also opportunities to align with these efforts with the Justice 40 initiative established by the President's executive order, which sets the goal that 40% of climate investments that to benefit disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by population. Finally, reductions in fossil fuels use other decarbonization activities and investments that will cause some jobs to disappear and will create others. There needs to be a clear funded plan for transition to those impacted workers. Last year, I'm going to give you a snapshot of where we are timeline-wise. So last fall, we established working groups organized by each pathway and received valuable input from the community, local governments, and interested stakeholders who helped draft the implementation playbook. As you can see in the yellow, this is where we are currently to show the status of the implementation playbook, which is open for your review. So we want to spend this time with you to collect your feedback and building momentum for proposed regional actions, because we do intend to seek board adoption of the integrated regional decarbonization framework tentatively in mid-March, to seek direction on implementation and actions going forward. Based upon this board direction, we intend to pursue a regional climate action and adaptation strategy in the future. Finally, I want to just leave this with you. This is how you can get involved. So everyone here today present, you may have seen these flyers, these little fact sheets as you came in at the beginning. And there's resources at the bottom of how you can get engaged or get in contact with us. For those of us who are joining on Zoom, you can see that these links will be available in the chat. So if you follow along with me, the very first one at the top in the green block, that'll be our engagement site, which is how you can engage with us and make comments on the implementation playbook. And underneath that, you also have two other resources. You can email us directly at zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov. And we've also added the two websites where you can learn more about the RDF in general and also our Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. Lastly, I'll leave this with you with those resources. Again, thank you all so much for being here and taking time to be with us. And just again, want to reiterate that the engagement is very important and valued to us. So if you do have any questions about how to engage and make your comments or get involved with the chat on our engagement website, please ask us questions or email us directly anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elise. So now what you've all been waiting for, your opportunity to ask questions and make comments here. I want to reiterate that for those of you on Zoom, you can drop your questions and comments into the Q&A function. And if you are joining us on Zoom as a Spanish speaker or Arabic speaker, please feel free as well to drop your comments because they will be translated and we will be taking some of those questions. Y si hay personas aquí que hablan español que tienen una pregunta, por favor, al mismo tiempo pueden levantar su mano y mi colega les va a traducir su pregunta. So with that, again, we will be alternating between our Zoom audience and our live audience with our Q&A session. We're going to start with some questions here from our live audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and our other facilitator will join you with the mic. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm sorry. We need to get our presenters up here. My apologies. Let's get our presenters back up here. Thank you. Sorry. I was going to answer all the questions, but they can probably do it better.
Cheers in the front.
Thank you. Please raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you. First, congratulations on a wonderful piece of work so far. We have much to do to get to implementation, and I know we all appreciate that. I'm concerned in listening to the presentation tonight about some linkages. And I'll just ask one question now, I may ask another later. But I think it's appropriate to talk about heat as you did, Doctor. Wonderful. It is certainly a major issue. If you look at the playbook, I read it carefully, there's no mention of projects related to heat and heat mitigation and heat adaptation. So there's a need for a linkage, I believe, between the effects, the health effects, as you properly pointed them out, and the actions in the plan. To elaborate just a little bit, we've had the last several years an El Niño, and expectations are late this year we'll hit El Niño, and 2024 may bust all records for world record heat, at least in the human space. Right? So excessive heat impacts are vital to be addressed, and I'm very concerned about, among others, the unhoused and how we will support them. And, you know, should we have, like LA and Atlanta, a chief heat officer for the county with specific adaptation projects? Or I guess the fundamental question is, how do we build the linkage between decarbonization and the heat impacts, the health impacts from heat?
I'll begin the answer. Really, really astute observation. Really appreciate you going through the implementation playbook to identify the linkages, because that's what we want to do. We want to hear and understand how the mitigation and the resiliency aspects can be connected. So right now, the playbook is organized by the 5 sectors. And within each sector, for example, land use and natural climate solutions, there are solutions related to the tree canopy that Dr. Wooden was referring to. That is within food systems and natural climate, food systems and circular economy, we discuss agricultural solutions, including community garden. There are also, in terms of the heat, concentration of heat on due to reflective impervious surfaces, there's a considerable amount of treatment there as well in terms of solutions. So it's not identified directly as this is directly going to impact heat, but I think that what you're saying is the resiliency components, adaptive components, in terms of evaluation performance needs to be kind of integrated in the strategies we develop. So I think that's very important as we go to the next level. I think Elise mentioned one of the regional approaches we're looking at is the connection, a regional adaptation and mitigation strategy, so that the two are related. And that is the future. That's where we want to be.
Thank you for that very thoughtful question. I just wanted to share that excessive heat is a response to actions that we are taking to increase the effects of climate change. So the plan that is being developed will create options for our community to mitigate or decrease the side effects of climate change. So, but as it relates to extreme heat, I am very proud of the work that we have done in the county in responding. We have a very robust excessive heat task force that has been in effect since 2006, when the extreme heat event occurred. And as a result of that, we have over 20 county departments, as well as the National Weather Services, SDG&E, that come together when there is an alert that's issued by the National Weather Service. So that's a response too, and that's in place. We have cooling centers. SDG&E provides fans that can be disseminated, but when the temperature is extreme, like 95 or higher, fans don't help at all. So we have a robust response effort, which is, I see, downstream, but this plan is upstream to help decrease the effects of climate change. So we have to do both at the same time.
I have like so much, but I'm just gonna try to cut it down. Oh, so hi, my name's Gloria. I'm just gonna start this off by saying that this is all kind of based on me experiencing the wildfires in 2007. I was about 11 years old, and I lived in Escondido, and I had to get some family members out from Palma, so I'm a little traumatized from that, and I just don't ever want to have that happen again, but it's likely gonna happen. Because of climate change. So anyway, let me just get to the point. To not frame a question so much in a reactive way, I'll just go straight into the proactive. Once we figure out how to invest whatever kind of funding we have now for some of these projects, I'm just kind of wondering what plans we have to implement. And if we can get county funding for incentivizing low-income communities to get onto some of these projects, like EVs and all that, and taking workforce housing into consideration, maybe having some projects for compensation of long-time residents so there's no displacement, what kind of
projects we have going on for sustainable food access, communities, spaces and cool zones, because I live in Escondido and it's pretty hard to get to a cool zone when it's really, really, really hot. We had a lot of unhoused neighbors that we didn't know really where to send them other than maybe the library, but that's not really the best place for to send a bunch of people, especially if there's COVID and you're gonna get sick, right? And addressing the bus driver shortage, to make transportation more accessible, and getting more bus stops. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but these are just some more proactive ideas and questions I've been kind of pondering. So, and one more thing that's very important, but the education and partnership component, because right now I don't feel we have a lot of the capacity here with the organizations in North County. So I don't know if what y'all want to take from that, but yeah, thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. Those were, it was quite a bit, so I don't know if there's something there you guys wouldn't mind to respond to.
We
Thank you.
just really appreciate that we're making note of it, and that implementation playbook is a living document that will continue as folks like you continue to engage. We'll continue to update it with new ideas. So it is not, this is just, if you will, a journey where we have to be, it's a long marathon. It's a journey we have to be together on, and we want to continue to incorporate and update as these ideas come. So I really appreciate that, and please continue to tell us more ideas. Send us, as Elise mentioned, we're really open to any form of feedback and updating the website in the future. So I didn't mention to you the implementation playbook, as Elise mentioned, the draft. Right now it's a Word document, but our intent is to make it an accessible tool so that it is not just for theoretical interest, but has some practical day-to-day application for whether it be individuals, households, businesses, organizations, communities, cities, or us together as a region. So please feel free to suggest any ideas that we're missing.
Thank you for your observations. I wanted to just comment on two of the ideas that you spoke of, and the first was cool zones, and the second is food system. Regarding cool zones, there were definitely challenges during COVID-19. The cool zones are announced every year during April or May, and we should look forward to that. You can go to the website, just go to any search engine and just put in Cool Zones San Diego, and the Aging and Independent Services Department within Health and Human Services Agency coordinates that particular activity. So every year there is an announcement of where the cool zones are. So I encourage you to just be aware of that. And then the second was related to the food systems. There are two projects that the County of San Diego is involved with. The first is funding from ARPA funding that has allocated specifically for community gardens about $6 million. And that whole project is now being coordinated through a contract or through a relationship with the San Diego Foundation. So they are basically creating the opportunity for entities to apply for funding to create community gardens. We also have a small pot of funding from CalFresh, which is from the state, and is also associated with the development of community gardens. So, and if you have further questions about that, I'm happy to take questions, or you can email us to get further information. But those are the two areas that support the food system. Thank you.
We're going to take one more question from
Hello. Good evening. Christina Marquez. I'm with IBEW Local 569. We're the Electrical Workers Union. We represent over 3,600 members in all of the counties in San Diego. Thus, why I'm here. But we're here to make sure with all of this electrical work that's coming up, we want to make sure that it's the high road, high wage jobs, as you guys said. And I know that implementation is probably a big concern with everybody. How will this happen? And how will it get done? And who will do it? And how will we make sure that these people are getting paid proper with local hire? Is one way maybe like a county or citywide project labor agreement? I mean, the city and the county have to work together on these. It's not just one entity that's gonna be able to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Whilst you're pulling up the online, I can just respond to Christina. So appreciate that comment and appreciate you attending so much. I really appreciate all of you and those of you who have consistently provided input into the different stages of this project. I think Christina is referring to the workforce development study, which was completed last August as well, from the authors of that study being Inclusive Economics and UC Berkeley Labor Center. And the charge that they had was, how do we make sure that climate-related policies are not done in a vacuum, that there is a component on how does it affect our workforce, both current and in the future, and that there is pipelines for opportunities that are created as a result of climate investments. We are, as I was doing in the introduction, in unprecedented times of investment, both federal, state, but also from the private sector in terms of the global economy. As this clean economy takes shape and shapes our region in the future through 2030, our from the UC San Diego side, estimates were that there's going to be 27,000 of these new jobs that'll be created every single year. So the question then is, well, what kind of jobs are they and which industry sectors? How does the future workforce look like? And how does it benefit those communities that are the most disadvantaged in the region? So that's where questions about local hire come into play, and agreements in terms of how do we partner between labor and management to make this happen. So I think, thank you for your comment, but I wanted to give a little bit more expanded context for the study you're referring to.
Thank you. We're going to take a question from our remote location now. Dr. Sulich will read the question.
Okay, so we got several questions from the remote location, but they're all around the same theme. So I'm going to ask, maybe I'll put a couple of them out and then you can figure out how you want to answer. Why does the RDF ignore the 3.98 billion, I think, cost of the transmission line from the Imperial in San Diego and its calculation of the transmission cost for remote solar and wind impacts? And then why does the RDF use obsolete cost figures for rooftop solar that are approximately 50% higher than present day costs? And I'll just say there's also some other questions. We have so many questions, I'm just going to add in a couple more. There's also some other questions looking at, the relative impact of generating electricity rurally and the demand coming from the more urban areas, and how to address all those issues. The one more part of that is they wanted to know if they could look at the statistics, or if the analysis could be made available for review.
Thank you. So, okay, so let me summarize the question that in terms of what is the assumptions about the transmission costs and whether they include a certain transmission line, whether there's a project in the technical study and whether there's a rooftop solar being is it as incorrectly analyzed. Okay, got it. So this is a very interesting time where rooftop solar and community solar are really taking shape in not just locally but across the region, and I would say much larger than just us. The way in which what I think this question refers to is the study, the technical study. So let me just back off a little bit in terms of what it is. The county itself did not do the study. So the staff was directed by the Board of Supervisors in January of 2021 to use UC San Diego's Global School of Policy, which has some of the best brains in this field, to do a technical study that shows the pathways to decarbonization. There were 4 pathways that Elise mentioned that the study analyzed that got our current emissions, each of these sectors, to zero. The bottom line of that study was that it is possible, but yet there are trade-offs needed, both in terms of cost, social considerations, economic, environmental, that need to be considered by policymakers. The study is neither a recommendation to or from the county. It is independently done by the UC San Diego team, and particularly we're talking about that energy study and the scenarios that were developed within that energy study. The scenarios that were developed in the energy study considered, and we went to the board 3 times with different types of scenarios and presented a variety of options. Every single time the team refined those scenarios to be able to address what the board asked, which included a lot of considerations that came from public input, such as how do we conserve agricultural land or sensitive land, certain areas that we don't want to be developed. And for each of these different scenarios, I think the map that Elise showed was one of the scenarios, which is let's maximize rooftop solar, which was a directive from the board to develop that map to show what if we put solar on every single rooftop in the San Diego region, then what does it look like? And then if we fell short, then how do we cover every parking lot, infill parking lot with solar, and then see where it goes? We also did that because our board also sits on the San Diego Community Power board. How do we see how much of the power is generated within San Diego Community Power territory? So each of these scenarios were developed with board direction. And then most importantly for rooftop solar, the question is, in terms of cost, how do we make sure that these benefits are accrued to and directed towards disadvantaged communities? So the intent was, let's run these scenarios, see what the cost differential are, and come up with the numbers so that policymakers have the ability to have a range of options by which they can choose what the relative costs and assumptions are. And if they don't want to include costs, that's okay too. You can do it just with the benefits alone. So each of these scenarios were generated. In terms of transmission line costs, they did not put in any project at all. There is no project being proposed by the staff. There is no plan or an energy policy being proposed. The only assumptions there in transmission costs are that those that come from the state of California, independent system operators, which is a statewide transmission planning process. It is not something driven by the County of San Diego, and it is not a project of ours. So these assumptions are transparent, they've been posted, and those have been discussed several times, at least 3 during the process of developing the draft including those UCSD's experts, but other energy policy experts as well. And I know I'm going to a pretty lengthy discussion here, but I wanted to kind of pin it with saying there are no recommendations from the staff about any particular scenario for any energy siting scenario in the technical study or from what we're going to the board with.
Okay, so I'm going to do questions from the Zoom now, which there's a lot of questions and they're really good. So we're not going to get to all of, we're only going to get to a couple of them. As Danielle mentioned, the staff will respond to all the questions and also I think post the answers so everybody can see them on the web. So what is the status of regional collaboration? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about cities working together to decarbonize the region?
We are working together.
Okay. How is the regional decarbonization plan integrating the goals of SB 1383, short-lived climate pollutants bill, with an increase of recycled organics in the form of compost increasing from the current production level of 300,000 tons of compost a year to approximately 1 million tons?
Oh, this is excellent. So this is the organics recycling law that went into effect, and all of the cities in the region have to follow this. Many of the cities are trying to catch up, and this is where regional collaboration is super important in terms of, I already believe in the North County, some of the cities are coordinating with each other. The County of San Diego organizes a group across all jurisdictions and the waste haulers to be able to talk to each other. We presented several times. We think that that's a great model for regional collaboration. So yes, there needs to be a lot more done. And I appreciate the question that came in from the mulch. If we can solve that, that would be a great model for everything else.
So it is after 8. I want to apologize because we want to be respectful of your time, but we know there's a lot of questions out there, so we're going to take one more question, Chris.
Thank you. I don't have a question per se. It was more a comment focused on solutions, trying to connect the dots between the land use and food system categories that were described. And I do appreciate all the thinking that has gone into this process. My name is Mike Lee. I'm a longtime District 5 resident and the Public Affairs Manager for the San Diego County Water Authority, which is the wholesale water agency that supports this region. We, for the past year or so, have been discussing with the San Diego County Farm Bureau and others ways to provide additional support to the farmers that are the foundation of the rural economy in North County, along with the quality of life benefits that we enjoy here. The concept that we've kind of centered around is to use the climate mitigation funds to defray the cost of maintaining the existing groves, millions of trees, avocado, citrus, and others, because of the sequestration benefits that they provide. That is to say, if we're to plant 1 million trees in the cities and lose 1 million trees outside our back door here, we've not only lost the sequestration benefits, but all the food benefits that those farmers are providing. And so obviously the details of how such a program would work are beyond the scope tonight, but I would encourage you to look at a 2018 study by Batra Ecological Services for the San Diego Food System Alliance. It's funded by the San Diego Foundation. It provides kind of a startling look at what happened to our trees in the groves between 2000 and 2015. And I would encourage you to help sustain those as we go forward. Otherwise, we're just going to fall farther behind.
Thank you for that comment. If I can just add a little bit on water, and I had mentioned it in the last, we've heard a lot of comments on water. Right now, water is not its own separate sector, but as we develop our website, we're going to elevate it and create its own sector. So it's not just decarbonization, but some of the farming community here, we realize there's a lot of synergy, and we have an industry where we have the largest number of small farms in our county than any other county in the region. Also, in terms of organic farming, in the nation, sorry. In terms of organic farming, same thing. So if you go down, we are the farmer, the ideal, the poster child farmer, and we need to work together to solve that. So it's not just a decarbonization problem, it's a drought problem, it's a sustainability problem as a region. So looking forward to working together on that.
We're going to take one last question.
Thank you. I'm here wearing multiple hats, and I just recently came back from New York City for a Just Transition Roundtable, speaking about the work that I do here in San Diego. And so I definitely want to speak to Christina's point about the Just Transition. And I would like to ease her concern definitely from a prevailing wages perspective. So that there's new legislation now that the rooftop solar installations have to be with prevailing wages. So I think that's really important for us to highlight. In addition to that, at the nonprofit to protect our communities, I know that there is some contrasting information, significance. I think, Murtaza, you've done a great job in addressing some of that tonight. And in your implementation playbook, there are great highlights on rooftop solar, community solar, et cetera, although there is one line item in 4.3.1 that talks about waiving permits. And I'm just really curious on the county's position on why would they want to waive permits, especially with those utility scales. That's like a revenue generation that might be eliminated, as well as potential impacts from a CEQA perspective, from a community perspective. And with the data points that you addressed earlier, would the county be open to do independent peer review in that consideration? And then my very last point is I am the Environmental Climate Justice Chair for the NAACP. And as we're talking about climate equity, energy equity, environmental justice, I think it's most important that the communities that's most impacted, the Black and Brown communities, are the ones that are engaged in every phase and every stage of this, and as well as the terminology is something that the communities that are impacted are comfortable with. And I know disadvantaged communities is not a terminology that a lot of people that in the community that I do life with are comfortable with, and that is something that's also highlighted in the White House documentation with Shalonda Young that's coming from the White House office. So I would love the county to consider that, and also consider hiring and contracting. The communities you're saying that are most impacted are contracted and are part of the process for real equitable procedural justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. I'll just wrap it up with one of the key observations you raised about equity being this needs to be centered around equity, and the name of our office with environmental justice, it really is about the fair treatment of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, income, and then meaningful involvement. Those are the two pillars of environmental justice. And meaningful involvement involves that access and deliberative process by which communities that are affected are part of that decision-making itself. So we're working on that. We have partnerships currently with CBOs. We're growing that. We're growing the partnerships into the community to build more community-driven climate action projects, and to provide the tools and resources so that communities can determine and build up on it, particularly things that are coming down, tools like community solar that you mentioned, so that those, for example, that do not have a rooftop, that do not have access to those kind of facilities can actually avail of renewable energy resources. And oftentimes they are shortchanged with rates over which they have no control over. So this is about resiliency, and it's also about economic sustainability and self-determination. So that is what equity means to us, and we are working on it. We're growing. We know that we have a lot of work to do. So we're looking forward to working with you all on this. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to say thank you to all of you here as well as on Zoom. Thank you for hanging in there and staying present and asking some really great questions. We want to thank the North Inland Live Well Center for hosting us tonight, as well as the supervisor here in District 5. And we want to thank again Climate Action Campaign for their collaboration, and Big Front Door for the amazing food and snacks that they provided tonight. We want to thank all of our presenters, Public Health Services, and the Luge team, and all of their staff. We do have one more meeting that's coming up in District 3. The location and date are still pending, so you can be on the lookout for that. We really do hate that we can't get to everybody's questions. Please email us at zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov. Use those comment cards in the front, and we appreciate that we kept you a little longer, but again, we really hate not getting to everybody's questions. So thank you, everyone. Good night.
Stop recording.